In some ways, MCC, and again, I don't mean to be offensive, and I hope I'm not, but MCC was always sort of the stodgy old grown-up of the co-op movement. It was more serious, it was more practical, it was more applied. Nobody wanted to admit it, but a co-op is a business. And so there were, financial and economic aspects that we needed that stodgy old grown-up MCC to help us figure it out. But again, there's a tension there between the ideal of this collective and housing for people, not for profit, and the reality of you have to be able to make that balloon payment X years down the road.
We discussed that periodically at the house about whether to join or not, and there were usually people of a more anarchistic bent who wanted to maintain complete independence, thinking that if you got under the umbrella of MCC, you would start to have to conform to certain standards of MCC, among which included putting more money into more of a pot for the co-op movement in general. And a lot of people were living as cheaply as possible.
Something else was obstructing the expansion of housing co-ops in Madison. During 1972, zoning regulations were implemented which restricted the number of unrelated people allowed to live together in certain districts to 2. These, quote, family-friendly regulations effectively prevented co-ops from expanding beyond the downtown. In many national courts, the battle was being waged over the constitutionality of the rules, which had been similarly implemented in other cities. A few years later, a U.S. District Court declared the regulations unconstitutional, but the ruling was later overturned by a Supreme Court decision that allowed police action to enforce the regulations in the interest of, quote, laying out zones where family values, youth values, and the blessings of quiet seclusion and clean air make the area a sanctuary for people. In the face of its difficulties, the co-op movement still thrived. MCC got its first mortgage with the help of the WSHDC when it bought 290 Langdon, the former Tuforia co-op, which had since been renamed Tralfamadore. The same year, MCC sold bonds and bought its third owned house, Lothlorien Co-op, at 244 Lakelawn Place. The Yahara Co-op Land Trust formed around this time east of the Yahara River with the intention of becoming an East Side MCC. MCC helped them buy their first and only house, Yahara Linden Co-op, in 1973. The climax of this era of the co-op movement in Madison happened in 1974. A very successful co-op fair was held that year. Madison had dozens of housing cooperatives, and hundreds of people in the campus area were living cooperatively. MCC had been leasing Le Chateau for 3 years when in 1974 the owners Alpha Chi Rho put it up for sale. MCC was interested in buying the house and made an offer. A well-known landlord named James Korb made an offer that was $10,000 less than MCC's, but he offered the money right away, whereas MCC wanted to purchase on a land contract. The fraternity accepted Korb's offer. Korb, who owned over 40 properties in Madison, was famous for cutting up buildings into small efficiencies and charging premium rents to desperate students. The members of Le Chateau weren't going to stand by while their house was sold out from under them and cut up by a greedy landlord.
I think I became involved in that because I was working for Free for All at the time, and I ended up being the one who wrote articles about it. But it boiled down to a self-conscious assertion of a belief that people should have control over where they live, and a belief that this house should be allowed to survive as a co-op. And that, it was sort of a travesty to take a viable, functioning house and turn it into what would essentially be efficiency apartments.
Members of the House started an anti-Corb campaign they called Isaiah 5:8, after a Bible passage. The group called for a rent strike on all of Corb's properties, which significantly affected his business. They held an anti-Corb block party at which 1,500 people burned Corb in effigy.
But I think what really caused him to back off was the boycott, because he was buying apartments on speculation, and when he started losing income, he lost his ability. He couldn't have bought the thing if he wanted to.
Corb had built his empire by using existing mortgages to get new mortgages, and the co-opers knew that if he defaulted on just one, it could topple his empire.
We were out leafleting when students were out looking for housing. We were using free-for-all. We, I think, had some articles in the Daily Cardinal as well, trying to get the word out.
Just before the group was prepared to peacefully occupy the building that they were no longer allowed in, Corb pulled out of the deal. MCC was able to buy the house, but in the ensuing years would have a hard time meeting its financial obligations. Co-opers and Madison tenant activists saw this as a major victory against profiteering landlords. The campaign against Corb continued, and the same year Corb left town, vowing to stay out of the downtown real estate business. A mural painted on Le Chateau's front wall depicted the struggle and the sentiment.
I don't think we understood that it would work. The part that I feel some regret about, because we did not set out to put him out of business, but I think we hurt him enough that he actually had to sell a number of properties.
Only a year after the struggle with Corb, the Vietnam War ended, and many of the students were no longer students and found themselves searching for a less transient place to create their utopia. Many went back to the land, and many moved to the Near East Side to establish a more permanent community. MCC found itself left high and dry. New students coming to campus weren't as radicalized as their predecessors, and were more ignorant of the purpose and legacy of the co-op movement in Madison. One pessimist described co-ops as a dead albatross around the community's neck. MCC's 4 owned houses were in debt and falling apart from neglect of transient members, not to mention that their land contracts were coming due. MCC consisted of Kibbutz, Le Chateau, Tralfamadore, Lothlorien, Nottingham, Rochdale, Solvig, Stone Manor, Summit, Toad Lane, Badger Photo Co-op, Friends, Groves, Hinanden, International, New Wine, Mustard Seed, Shiloh, Wayland, and St. Francis.